Okay, maybe the hat's a little bit over the top, but man, you read about these colonial campaigns and part of you just has to put on a pith helmet and grab a martini. Thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we are taking a look at The Martini-Henry for Queen and Empire by Neil Alpinshaw. It's a brand new book and one of very few reference sources out there on the Martini-Henry. And this book went straight back to the archives. Mr. Alpinshaw spent something like 8 years researching this book based on a lifelong passion for the Martini-Henry. And what I like is that it's not just the rifle, it's also the military circumstances in which it was used. So some firearms reference books can skew very technical and very specific, the number of threads on the second pattern screw versus the third pattern screw, that kind of thing. Where what Alpinshaw has done is kind of go the other direction and make more of a readable, engaging history of the rifle interspersed with accounts of its use in the field across the British Empire in places like the Sudan and Afghanistan and South Africa, and those places that really made the Martini this symbol of the Victorian British Empire. So it, of course, starts at the beginning with the original British conversion of muzzleloaders into Snider rifles, kind of the British equivalent of the trapdoor Springfield. In developmental terms, for them it was a temporary rifle because they knew that some sort of permanent breech-loading rifle would be developed. Well, that would end up being the Martini, and Alpinshaw describes and discusses the process that they went through to come up with the first pattern of Martini. What I really like then is he also goes into the whole teething process of what it took to get this from an initial trials rifle, prototype, a gun that passed trials and did very well, turning that into a mass production standard issue rifle for a global empire is never going to be an easy or perfectly successful task. Every rifle introduced like this has teething problems. And so what he does is discuss what those problems actually were, getting around a lot of the rumor and sort of the old school gun counter lore that so often starts from a little kernel of truth and then just gets retold by person after person and kind of tweaked. It's a game of telephone. What starts as a kernel of truth turns into something totally different. Anyway, so he goes through the development of the Mark I and then the Mark II Martinis, and then goes into some areas that I think are not very well understood by people who aren't really particularly deep into the Martini. Probably my favorite chapter of the bunch, actually, was on the Martini-enfield rifle that never really actually quite happened. This was the attempt to upgrade the standard, what we would think of as a standard short lever Martini. It's 5.77 450 caliber, single shot. It is the rifle from the movie Zulu, basically. Well, the British government, the military, was looking at ways to improve that, and they ended up adopting the Lee-Enfield, a bolt-action rifle, or the Lee-Metford first. But there was this whole process that actually resulted in tens of thousands of rifles being built that was going to turn the Martini into the top-notch, top-of-the-line, high-end single-shot military rifle. They changed the caliber, they necked it down, they made it a smaller bore, higher velocity thing. They actually designed an entire speed-loading sort of external magazine that clamped onto the side of the receiver. And they went through a bunch of different versions of that, and it's frankly really cool stuff. And it would have become the new British service rifle if the bolt action and smokeless powder hadn't taken over instead. And that's an area that you just don't see much discussion of. It's a very cool what could have been. In fact, what sort of was, but never quite got fully adopted. Moving along past there is then, of course, the Mark IV Martini, which is what I've got in the back there. That's the long lever pattern. This was, okay, we've got Lee-Enfields, but we have a lot of volunteers, we have a lot of militias, we have a lot of places where maybe we don't have enough Lee-Enfields to supply everyone, or maybe we just don't need to give everyone the top-of-the-line rifle. So what did we come up with for a reserve? All of the various carbines of Martini pattern, some of them in 450, some of them in 303. It talks about the ammunition here, talks about some of the attempts to make them better at long-range shooting, some of the very interesting experiments with volley sights. And through this whole book, every time he's talking about something like this, like if the discussion of volley sights comes up, It's because these rifles were used in volley fire quite a lot. Like, that was one of the main British tactics for use of the Martini. And he will discuss real life situations, battles, where these tactics were employed. And he does so very well. This isn't dry. This is a very engaging book about the history, how the history led to the development, and how the development influenced the service history of the Martini. So this is a text-heavy book. There are pictures, but it is not by any means one of those books that's padded out with pictures. It's 256 pages with a lot of text in it. Well written. I don't know if I alluded to this earlier, but this is not the only book out there on the Martini. It is definitely, I will say, the best book on the Martini, the most accessible and the most useful. But there are a couple of books that have predated this that came out earlier. There's a trio, of which I've only managed to collect 2 myself. Treatise on the British Military Martini by Ian Skennerton and B.A. Temple. These books have more reproduced, like, original, actual memos, factory archive documents, correspondence in them, but these are far, far harder to actually read, to actually reference, to find information in. They don't present a very clear story, and of course they're all out of print now anyway. And Alpinshaw does a much better job of presenting this history. So cover price on this is $60. It is being printed by International Military Antiques, which is the perfect person to publish it. That's the company that bought the entire Nepalese, basically the whole stash of Nepalese antique firearms, which included tens of thousands of Martinis, which was part of the research that went into this, but that's a side story. You can buy it directly from IMA through their website. You can get it on Amazon, where it is being sold by IMA directly from their website. So I'll include both links, but they're both ultimately coming from the same place and the same person. So it doesn't really matter which one you use. Highly recommend this for anyone who is interested either in collecting Martinis or simply in the history of the British Empire. I think there's a lot of, it's not a book specifically about the British Empire fighting overseas in its colonial possessions, but there is a good chunk of that in here that supports and adds to the description of the firearms development. Anyway, I think I'm kind of rambling at this point. Great book. Highly recommended if you're interested in anything of this period or collecting the Martini. And I think that's about all I got for this time. Thanks for watching.